Hello everyone, Matt from Model Minutes here, and welcome back to the workbench for another unboxing. Today I'm taking a look at this, the Messerschmitt Me262A/1a/2a in 1/72 scale from Airfix. So join me on the workbench as I take a look inside the box and see what this one is like. So on the outside we can see we've got this exciting image of the Me262 in combat with a bomber formation. Down here on the bottom left we have an item code of A03090 Alpha. And then if we flip onto the thin edge, we have some information about the actual Me262 and some dimensions. A length of 148 millimeters, a width of 174, and there are 74 parts included. It indicates to us here that there are two paint schemes, and both of these represent aircraft from 1945. Perhaps one may be more complicated than the other with the modelling, but we'll have to explore them in a little more detail when we open the box. Paint colour callouts are here for the Humbrol range if you'd like to use them, but of course you could use any brand that you prefer, and a skill level of 2. So Airfix thinks this is going to be moderately easy to build, but not the easiest in the range. We have one flying hour coupon. This is a token that if you cut out and keep, and if you're a member of the Airfix Club, you can redeem against more kits. Alternatively, if you're not a member of the Airfix Club, do send them to Models for Heroes and they can redeem them for their charitable work. On this side here, we have some health and safety information, but we do have a logo down here from Cartograph, which indicates the decals will be manufactured by Cartograph, and they are usually to a really nice quality. Over on the right-hand side, Airfix do add our tooling and release information. So this is a 2017 tooling, so not necessarily the most recent kind of product from Airfix, but still part of their kind of new design phase. This particular one dates from 2023, so there have been some previous versions. The rear of the box just features a kind of batch number, and then the thin edges features the same information that we've already seen, so you can identify it on the shelf. In a slight change to normal, you can see I've not had this one open yet, so this will be a treat for all of us. Normally I open my boxes as soon as I get them to see what the product is like inside. And there we go. So what I'm going to do is start off with the instructions first, because that's where I like to begin. Instructions are to the normal format from Airfix. We have information about the actual aircraft on the front, a few little tips down the bottom, and then when we turn over we have sort of a little bit of safety information and a key to the different symbols we might encounter. And then we begin the construction of our kit. It is shaded with some extra bits of colour to help make it a little bit easier to follow what we're doing, as well as some things picked out in the kind of relevant colours that they would be. It appears that we start off with the cockpit tub, we add various details inside of it, and there are some decals for the control panel. There is a pilot included, apparently, which is optional to install, and then once we've finished our cockpit assembly, we can come down to our lower wings. Lower wings have some extra bits which need to be installed in here, which are supports for our cockpit tub. There are some holes here which are optional to drill out depending on the variant you're doing. If you're doing variant A, then you'll need to open up these holes. Once we've done that, we can add this sort of central bulkhead and then join our two fuselage parts together, which can then be glued onto that lower wing assembly we've just done. There are some holes here which are for a display stand, but these display stands I've not seen in the Airfix range for many years, so you would probably have to source your own display stand if you wanted to include that, because one is not included in the kit. Upper wing surfaces can be added, and the nose gear bay can be installed, but it does say here to make sure that you install 5 grams of nose weight, because otherwise it will sit on its tail. As a small point, if you're going to install the bomb for scheme B, there are some holes here that you need to open up. Tail surfaces get added, and then we move on to the engines. So the engine nacelles get built up with a number of components, sandwiching different parts together. And there are some notes here about the different colours that should be used. I suppose it depends on the variant what the exterior colour is actually going to be. Then as we have assembled our nacelles, they can get installed onto the wings. I have heard that there might be a slight fit issue at these points, but as I've not built it yet, I couldn't necessarily comment on that. We have the option to have our landing gear in the raised position if we'd prefer, but I think you might even be able to use these as masks for the landing gear bays if you're painting them and airbrushing them. Alternatively, if you want to display your landing gear in the load position, there is an option to do that as well. It looks to be a little bit fiddly. There are some bits which have to slot in certain places and some small struts and things, but it looks relatively intelligently designed, so that should be pretty good. The wheels get built up with the hubs being glued into the wheels, and or sorry, the tires, but they do have like a positive locating point so that you don't get them in the wrong position. It appears that there is a flattened edge, which is why they have to go in a certain way, otherwise it won't look quite right. For scheme A, we have the option to install the little rockets on the wings, and we also, for scheme B, have the option to install bombs on the nose, depending on which you would prefer to do. Cockpit canopy then has two options. We can display it either closed or open, depending on our preference. There are a few little things such as the radio mast and the pitot tube which need to be installed, and at that point your build is complete, so it doesn't look overly complicated. It perhaps becomes a little bit more complicated when we come to the painting. German aircraft love to do lots of complicated modelling and things. So the first scheme here is a Me262A-1a in 1945. This might be the slightly more complicated paint scheme of the two. This is the one that has the rockets on the lower side of the wing, if you'd prefer to install that. And you can see actually it looks almost like they've had different parts installed at some point or other, because like this part of the engine is a different colour. Flipping over the page, we have one that's probably a little bit simpler to do. It has this sort of splinter camo and only a little bit of mottling in a few places. Maybe a little bit more complicated on the lower side. On the lower side on this one, it was all one colour, whereas on this one you can see different panels and things are picked out differently. So depending on your preference as to what you want to do, maybe this one, but they're kind of about the same actually, with the amount of different bits and pieces of backwards and forwards that you've got to do. I'm not entirely sure which one I would like to do. Maybe this one is a little bit more visually interesting, so maybe this one would be my choice. And it's got the rockets on under the wings, which would be quite nice. There are some research notes as well, which you can read about for extra context. And then on this last page here, we have stencil placement instructions. So these are for more decals, because otherwise it would be too complicated or cluttered to put them on your main painting instructions, which is good to see. So yeah, instructions look to be relatively straightforward to follow. So let's move on to the decals. And actually we have quite a small sheet of decals. I was expecting it to be slightly larger, given the amount of stencils, but they've kind of crammed everything in on there. You can see that they are printed to a pretty nice quality. The registration, where everything lines up, is nice and central, and even some of the small text looks to be fairly legible. So yeah, no issues there. Looks to be printed pretty well. Hopefully they go on okay. I don't think the decal application should be particularly complicated. I have seen more decals from an Airfix kit, so hopefully this is of a more manageable state. I do find the decal application can become tedious when you've got too many stencils to add, but actually that one doesn't look too bad. This then brings us onto our bag of sprues. I'm going to start by looking at the clear parts, which come in their own bag. It appears that we only have one small sprue for this, which would make sense because I think the only clear parts we had were for the canopy. We have our three canopy parts here, and you can see that there is some flash. Flash is manageable. I think we could cut that away relatively easily, but it is a bit disappointing that on a reasonably modern kit that there is this much flash. This shouldn't really be present. The framework is reasonably proud, which would make it relatively easy to mask it yourself if you wanted to do so. But I don't know if that's a bit... I think there might be a slight bubble on mine. Let me just grab a cocktail stick. So just here on the inside of this part, no, it's a scratch. So I can feel it as the cocktail stick rubs against it. There's a tiny little scratch on the inside of this part here. Probably not massively noticeable in the finished build, but a little bit disappointing. You would have hoped that the plastic parts would be a little bit better. Usable, but a little bit of work required to clean them up. Let's now take a look at the main parts then. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 dark grey plastic sprues. Let's take a look at the one with the fuselage parts on first. And they're moulded in the darker grey plastic, which we expect from more recent releases from Airfix. I quite like the dark grey plastic. It shows the details a little bit better when you're looking at them out of the box like this. The plastic doesn't feel particularly greasy. Airfix have had relatively greasy sprues in the past, but these don't feel too bad at all. Plastic is a little bit dense, but there is a bit of flex to it. Detail-wise then, it has recessed panel lines, some rivet details in places, Moulding is relatively crisp actually. There is a tiny little bit of flash in a few places, but nothing too much. We have some cockpit detail on this side, and ejector pins are on this side, but I believe this is the side you're not going to see a great deal of. So hopefully they won't be particularly visible in the finished build. The next sprue we'll look at then is this one. This is frame F, and it has our rockets for one of the paint schemes and our bombs for the other one. And they're molded to a nice quality. Nothing really in the way of flash on this one, which is quite nice to see. On this sprue we have drop tanks, which were not referenced. I believe that might be for a different version. These look like landing gear components here, and then some of our control surfaces or flight surfaces tail parts here, molded to a nice quality with some raised and recessed details. Panel lines are not massively chunky. We've seen much chunkier ones from Airfix in the past, and there is only a little bit of internal detail here, but flipping over you can see that it's kind of the same deal panel wise on this side. Not overly chunky. That should catch a wash quite nicely. On this sprue then, this is the bigger of the sprues, we have our main sort of lower side of our aircraft with some rivet detail in places. We have our engine details, which are quite nice here, nicely reproduced. It has the tyres with the flattened edge, engine nacelles. That main wheel looks quite nice. The cowlings for our nacelles are pretty good. Raised landing gear option there. Oh, pilot's here. Pilot looks a little bit chunky. I presume this has been designed specifically for this kit. There is a bit of a mould seam down the side of him, which will need a bit of removal just to tidy him up. But on the whole, okay. Has a big hole in the back though. So if you wanted to use this on other projects and you can see the back of him, you'd have to fill that in. But nothing, not really a problem in this kit because you're just going to glue him into his chair. Nose gear bay looks okay. Seat. Other parts of the cockpit. Yeah, it's moulded quite nicely. Flash on here is quite low, fairly manageable. Probably the most flash that we've seen so far was on the clear parts. This side has our ejector pin marks on, but again, I don't think these things are going to be visible, so that's all right, not too bad. Yeah, on the whole, looking all right. So let's recap. We had 1, 2, 3, 4 dark grey plastic sprues to a good quality. A little bit of flash in a few places, but generally moulded quite nicely. Level of detail looks pretty good. Not overly greasy. A fairly decent representation of the Me262. Our clear parts are perhaps needing a little bit of TLC to remove the flash. There is a small imperfection on one of the parts here, but we do have the option to display it in the open position if we would prefer. Decals are lovely, printed to a nice quality, and manufactured by Cartograph. I don't foresee any problems applying those. And then our instructions, which are up to the normal standard from Airfix, printed in full colour, which is always great to see, and the exploded diagrams are easy enough to follow. All of that came contained within this box, which is, you know, quite excitingly illustrated, and may well encourage someone to pick it up off this shop shelf. And speaking of the shop, how much would you be expecting to pay for this? At the time I'm making this video, the recommended retail price for this one is £17.99, which is kind of in line with other kits of a similar size and quality from the Airfix range, but you may be considering the fact that the Revell Me262, and granted the Revell one, I have built that as well, it is an older tooling from the 90s. It does kind of undercut this version by about, you know, it's almost half price. The Revell one is about a tenner, this one is about £18. So if you were going to go for a Me262 and you saw these two on the shelf, you might go for the Revell one because it's cheaper. However, having built the Revell one, I would say their level of detail is fairly similar, but the Airfix one does seem to have a slight advantage. If I remember correctly, you did have the option to raise the landing gear on both of them, but the Revell one was a bit disappointing in the cockpit area, especially with the canopy. The canopy didn't have, it was a single piece, so you couldn't open or close it. In this one, we do have it as a 3-piece canopy, so you have that option. Also in this kit, you get a pilot figure. Also, another point as well is on the lower side, when you did your like gear bays and things, the Revell one has the gear bays here all molded like as a single piece and you can't see the detail inside of it, whereas on this one you can. So it's open to where that sort of cockpit tub here. So the cockpit tub goes in and you can see all this detail here. So that's closed over in the Revell version, whereas in this one it's all open for you to view it without modification. So yeah, I think out of the box, this kit does have the edge in it being a newer tooling. It does look to have a similar level of detail, but it does have a slightly better quality in some aspects, particularly with the cockpit canopy being posable. Maybe this kit on the whole has a little bit less flash, a little bit more crisply molded. But if you saw the two in the shop and you didn't know the differences, which one would you end up going for? I would like to see this one a little bit cheaper, and if you definitely can find it cheaper, then that's a great way to go. Personally, I think I got this as part of like a mystery bundle, so I would have got this at a slightly reduced price anyway. As I mentioned, this is a slightly newer version than the Revell one. The Revell one dating from the 90s, however this one dating from 2017 means it does have some of those features that we like to see from more modern kits. It's been released a couple of different times in slightly different variants, which is why there are some parts that we've seen on these sprues which we may not end up needing for our particular kit. As mentioned, this kit dates from 2023, which was the last time it was released, but I imagine that we'll probably see a re-release of it again at some point in the future. But yeah, I think it's probably time to wrap this one up. This is a relatively nice looking kit. Maybe the price is a little bit higher compared to some of its competitors, but I think for what you're getting inside of the box, you're getting a very nice looking Me262 at the end of the day. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of my unboxing of this particular kit and if my assessment of it was fair. Don't forget that we do have a Model Minutes Model Club, and if you'd like to join the Model Club and get exclusive access to early videos and other perks, check out the links in the description. Massive thanks to these guys on screen for their extra support in allowing me to create consistent content. There are other ways to help support the channel if you'd prefer, and again, full information is below the video, but the best way to support the channel for free is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. Finally though, last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.